The University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts.
Under orders from the Secretary of Defense, women can now try out for all combat jobs in all services.
We turn now to what some military officials call an enduring and pressing emergency, the rise in veteran suicides.
But more than a dozen current and former cadets have told CBS News they reported their sexual assaults to the Air Force Academy, only to then experience retaliation.
Don't ask, don't tell is history, but there's still plenty to talk about.
Hello and welcome back to Thank You for Your Service, a hard look at American civil military affairs from the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. I'm Thomas Krasnation.
And I'm Nick Pareso.
Today, we're excited to bring you an interview on the topic of women's roles in the military. Our guest is Lyla Kohistany, a U.S. Navy veteran. She served as a surface warfare officer aboard the USS Essex and then transferred into the intelligence community, working as a Navy intel officer. During her time with the intelligence community, Lyla worked with Special Operations Forces.
After leaving the Navy, Lyla founded an organization called Promote, which seeks to improve work environments within Special Operations units, providing tailored training on topics such as mitigating bias, mentorship sponsorship, work-life integration, and creating an inclusive culture. She's also a member of the Truman National Security Project's Defense Council, a lecturer at Georgetown, director of government programs at the Cultural Intelligence Center, and a member of Virginia's Board of Veterans Services.
We talked with Lyla about a wide range of subjects, including women in the military, media portrayals of women service members and their implications for the civil-military divide, and how men can be better allies for women who serve. But before getting into those, we wanted to ask Lyla about her personal story, her family background, and why she chose to join the Navy. Here's the interview.
Lyla, thanks so much for coming on today to thank you for your service. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into your military career and some of your current work, we're wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your family background. I know you immigrated from Afghanistan at a pretty young age.
Yeah, so my father was enlisted in the 1970s in the Afghan National Army. And when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, he spoke out against the occupation and was imprisoned for a while. And eventually we applied for political asylum in the U.S. So I spent a little bit of time at a refugee camp in Peshawar, Pakistan, while we were waiting to come over to the U.S. And then I grew up in Northern Virginia, right around the Springfield, Burke area, and grew up in basically a microcosm of Kabul, in a sense. It was almost as if we had never left Afghanistan because my upbringing was a very strict Sunni Muslim home. Mm-hmm. My mom was covered. All the other women in my family were covered. And then I'm trying to straddle these two very different cultures, this becoming a young American girl, but also having to live in this extremely conservative Sunni Muslim home. So it was a unique background, which eventually ended up serving me well as I became an intelligence officer and started focusing on Afghanistan to understand the culture, to grow up with the religion, to grow up with the language.
Did you find it hard trying to navigate those two worlds as a child?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every day. It's difficult growing up in the U.S. as an immigrant. It's even, I would say, a different level added on to it when you're a refugee, mm-hmm. because you are fleeing your home country due to fear. And so there is a deep desire to maintain some connection to your homeland, but while still trying to adapt and acclimate to this new home. And I think my parents struggled with it, obviously, a great deal more than I did and that my brother did, but it was difficult.
Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you didn't leave Afghanistan?
I sure do, because my father, when I was 12, was working for UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education, Sciences, and Cultural Organization. And this was 1991. He was getting ready to go back to Afghanistan to help rebuild the education system. And he had arranged my marriage to a man who was 51.
Whoa. Oh, wow.
And so my older brother, thankfully, was an enlisted corpsman, which for those that might not be very familiar with the Navy, that's like a medic If you've ever seen movies, you hear people shouting medic. So that's what my brother did in the Navy. He was stationed at Balboa Hospital in San Diego, and he immediately got on a plane when my father gave him a call and said, taking your sister back to Afghanistan. I'm marrying her off to some guy who's 51. He puts in a leave chit. He comes home and he's like, no, you're not.
Wow.
So my dad says, all right, well, I can't just leave her here with your mother. A man needs to be taking care of her. So my brother says, fine, both her and my mom can come in, move in with me. And we went to San Diego and lived with my brother on his E3 salary, which does not go very far anywhere in the world, but definitely not in Southern California. And my father was murdered on that trip. And so my brother legally adopted me with the help of the Navy, and also made my mom a part of the military system as a dependent. And so, yes, I think often about what my life would have been like if I had, one, not left Afghanistan, because I would have definitely been married off when I was 12 years old. That would have happened because it's customary and very cultural. But I also think about what would have happened had my brother never found the Navy, and at the age of 19 had the means and the resources and the wherewithal to think I could take care of my sister and my mom at this age. Most 19-year-olds couldn't do that. You know, they're still in college, or they're starting a job or whatever it might be. But he had a lot of support because of the Navy. So I'm very grateful for that.
It was the Navy that really helped empower him and realize I have the capability to really do this and really take care of these people that I love so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he had some phenomenal mentors and advocates and champions who helped him with that entire process. And so, yes, it was the Navy that allowed this very young 19-year-old to feel and to think, I can do this. I can take care of 2 extra people at this point in my life, something that, again, I don't think many other people would be thinking at that age.
Yeah, that is crazy. You ended up graduating from Penn State in 2001 and then commissioning as a surface warfare officer in the Navy. Would you say that it was your brother's influence that led you to join the Navy, or was it other factors?
100% my brother's influence. But I will say I also felt legitimately like I wanted to give something back to our adopted home of the U.S. and wanting to serve in some way and give back, because we grew up on WIC checks and food stamps, and the government had done a lot for us, even from my childhood and then into my teenage years of being a military dependent through my brother. And I did want to give back in some way. So absolutely, he was the largest influencer. He helped me get into the ROTC program by helping me with, of course, everything that's necessary to get the paperwork in and make sure that I felt ready for it. And he also made me fundamentally a better officer, because having a brother who was enlisted, I had the benefit of understanding how important it was very early on to respect my enlisted leaders. And
So what did you do as a SWO?
So as a division officer, I was responsible for the executive department, which was difficult on a ship as large as the USS Essex. So we, as an amphibious ship, you're bringing on a complement of Marines, and you've got an entire Marine Expeditionary Unit coming on board. And then, of course, you also have, the more senior level, the fleet level flag officers coming on board. So it's a lot of work just managing protocol and the day-to-day and making sure everyone's getting the awards that they need. And there was a part of me that wished I had gone into something like engineering or weapons. Yeah. But the fascinating thing was, I think the universe had aligned some way, because I knew that I eventually wanted to become an intelligence officer. And I got a lot of experience briefing senior people as an O1 and as an O2 that really helped prepare me for my career in the intel community.
So you did eventually get the chance to transfer into the intelligence community. Can you speak a little bit? I know you can't say much, but in very general terms about what you did as a Navy intelligence officer?
So as all intelligence officers do, we go and spend some time on a watch floor and really learn the craft, if you will. And then I eventually was chosen to do a deployment with the Joint Special Operations Command to the Joint Interagency Task Force in Bagram, Afghanistan. And this was in 2005. So as an all-source intelligence analyst, I was responsible for taking all of the various types of intel in Afghanistan and putting it together into written products and target packages for various elements to be able to go and hunt down the terrorists that were threatening our national security.
And what did you find most surprising about your time in the intel community?
How much special operations valued intelligence and how no one ever cared that I was a woman. They just cared that I was good at my job. That was very shocking for me because I'd come from this surface background where there were so few women on the ship. Mm-hmm. And once I got to my ship and started spending more time in the wardroom, I realized everybody's watching me all the time because I'm a woman and I'm one of so few women. And then being on deployment, strangely, everybody was so busy doing their own job and everybody's so focused on the mission and no one really cared what uniform you were in. They didn't care what gender you were. All they cared about was that you were really great at your job. So
you're saying that in a sense there was more, I don't want to say sexism, but there was more awareness of your gender on the ship than there was in the special operations unit.
Yes.
And it was kind of that drive toward mission achievement, toward making sure you complete the goal that's so significant in the special operations community that kind of led toward that experience.
Absolutely.
Okay. So shifting gears a little bit toward talking about women in the military at large, we've done a few episodes on this podcast about the demographics of the military, talked about how there are now a lot of women serving in the military in a variety of roles, even though the military remains predominantly male. But we haven't talked much about the history of women in the armed forces, how we went from a military that was all male to one that now has more female representation. We were wondering if you could talk a little bit about how women's roles in the military have evolved over time.
Well, women have been fighting in America's wars since the Revolutionary War. Mm-hmm. So I always find it fascinating when people bring up more recent cases of women and valor and sacrifice and talking about the current battlefields of like Iraq or Afghanistan. And I talk about Deborah Sampson and Molly Pitcher and these folks, some of whom actually had pensions that were given to them because they were wounded in battle during the Revolutionary War. So I think women have always served. It's that their stories have largely remained untold. Mm-hmm. And over, of course, the more, I would say, recent history in the U.S., for me, at least in my line of work, I really hearken back to World War II when I think that there was a drastic shift in the way women were utilized inside of our War Department, if you will, back then. So I think back to the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services, and that's the predecessor to both the CIA and modern day special operations. And about a fifth of the individuals that served in the OSS, who ultimately helped defeat, the Nazi powers, they were women. And they were doing all types of work, not just administrative. They were on the front lines as spies, as couriers, as intelligence operatives. And I think that really helped pave the way, in a sense, for a lot of what we're seeing women do today. And in terms of evolution, women have been serving on combat ships and in combat aviation since the 1990s. And this notion that women are just now serving in ground combat roles because the policy that excluded them was repealed back about four or 5 years ago, it is not accurate. So women had been serving in ground combat roles throughout the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. If anything, the DoD, the Department of Defense, repealed the law because we already knew women were doing these jobs, and we needed to actually allow them to get credit for it and to get the tabs and to get the medals and to get the recognition for the fact that they had already been doing work in ground combat positions. So I'll go back to my earlier statement, which is women have always been doing this type of work. They just haven't had the right nomenclature or designator or pattern